it's now very personal. It's always been personal, but it's even more personal now. Now I know people. So yeah, there's this feeling of what am I doing? How dare I continue with my everyday life? I go to work, I come home, I've got a good life here. But how can I do nothing?
This is a memorial for the Nova victims.
This ambulance was in the Nova Festival site to serve with first aid for the 4,000 people that were in the festival. This ambulance, as you can see, was completely burned. When this was investigated here, they needed to bring the Israeli Antiquity Authority. Israeli Antiquity Authority have tools to investigate remnants of bones, whatever remained from a person after a long fire.
I'm at what they call Hostage Square, where people can remember those that are still in Gaza. So this is the factory.
I know.
The items come down the line. You put the food in the box. My job is to resupply the people on the line. We've got pineapple, tahina, peanut butter. These guys assemble the boxes.
Welcome to a Listen to Learn episode of the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and today I'm here with David Wittenberg. David, say hello.
Hello, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here as well. Today we're going to be talking to David about his trip to Israel, as well as the history that brought him to that point. He went to Israel this past December, so it's January 2025 right now. He went from December 28th to January 12th.
Yeah.
Went to visit, he went to help, he went to understand what was going on the ground. And so we get to chat with David today to learn what he learned in that experience, what he learned from the people on the ground, and as well as his perspective. So David, thank you so much for sharing this with us and being bold and willing to step out in a controversial topic to share with us your story. You and I have been longtime friends. When I had my marketing agency, Noodlehead Marketing, you were a client. And after I shut it down, you continued to work with me for a while. You're a bankruptcy attorney. And in the Norcross, Metro Atlanta area. Anything else you would add about yourself before we dive into a little bit of your backstory?
Father of two.
Yeah.
Have a grandchild.
Yeah. Oh, well, congratulations.
Yeah. She's almost 4 now. So yeah, she's growing very fast. Lived in the Atlanta area for 30 plus years, doing bankruptcy work for 31 plus years now. A practitioner, just have my own practice.
Yeah.
And, so if I'm not working, I do love traveling, but this trip was a little different. This was, I would call it a mission, for lack of a better word. It was strictly to help the economy, as I said, by buying one falafel at a time or one shawarma at a time, and also to offer some support with an organized program for 1 week and an unorganized program for another week. Just have found a Facebook group that shares volunteer opportunities. And I just went there, got a hotel room at a place where a lot of volunteers seem to gather, and just as opportunities came up, jumped on them.
Yeah. So we'll dive into that in more detail, but let's rewind a bit. So you've been in Atlanta for 30 years. Where did you start out?
I mean, go all the way back, born and raised in Maryland, just outside of D.C., undergrad, Connecticut College, then law school. Went back to D.C. for 3 years, worked as a paralegal, and then went to law school in Akron, Ohio, and was graduating law school, expecting a child. And my parents had found their way here to Atlanta. So my then wife and I decided it'd be nice to have family nearby, and that's what brought us to Atlanta.
Tell us about your religious upbringing. What about your parents and how that unfolded?
Yeah, so it was not a real strict, observant upbringing. We did not keep kosher. I did go to Hebrew school, and my father had no religious upbringing. My mother definitely had more of a religious upbringing. So we did go to Hebrew school a couple of days
Were they both
after
Jewish though,
school.
despite your
Yes,
dad's lack
yes,
of
both
ignorance?
Jewish.
Yeah.
Yes, both Jewish from Jewish neighborhoods in Philadelphia. But I did go to Hebrew school a couple of days a week during the week, and then a Saturday had Hebrew school as well. So I was not a good student. I didn't want to be there. So you get home from school, you want to go out and play, and I was being taken to Hebrew school. It was not where I wanted to be. And then my parents would send me to a Jewish camp through the
Okay.
synagogue.
Every
So
year
that,
or every couple times a year?
it was like a month program. I started really young. We would go
Yeah.
away for a month in the camp was in West Virginia. That I
Okay.
loved because there was
Yeah.
very little. We were just it was a camp. We had games and fun, and there was some religious instruction, but
Yeah.
it was nominal. So that I enjoyed. But they did make a commitment, despite not being super orthodox. We weren't just. I mean, we just didn't do a whole lot.
Yeah.
Religion. But despite that, my parents made a trip to Israel. I want to say 1976,
Okay.
and they came back and made a commitment to expose us to the country. I would say between 1977 and 1988, I was in Israel 5 summers. So one year we'd go to camp. The next year it seemed like we would go to Israel. Um, and really, we were immersed in Israel because they would rent an apartment. This is long before Airbnb. One year we rented an apartment and we were, I mean, the only Anglos in that building. And I brought a Nerf football with me. And I was about 12, 13 years old. And that Nerf football it was like I brought a UFO. Nobody had seen anything like that. So I was a big hit on the playground with my Nerf football. And because I didn't, I mean, I could kick a soccer ball around, but
Yeah.
these kids out of my league. But the Nerf football was a big hit. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we had,
Now, well,
yeah,
I'll let me interrupt you for a moment. For people that aren't familiar with like how Judaism is, there's the Reform side and the Orthodox. Could you just give a little like explanation of
yeah,
what that is?
yeah. Like any religion, there are folks that are going every other day. Some people just go for the big holidays. We
Mm-hmm.
were the big holiday type. Rosh
Yeah.
Hashanah, Yom Kippur. It's like folks that show up, for Christmas and an Easter Mass. It's and then there are those that are there every week.
Yeah.
So, like Reform Jews are not as uh, devout as an Orthodox Jew. An Orthodox Jew, the Hebrew prayers are an everyday part of their life. Living the commandments is an everyday part of their life. In the middle is a conservative. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like you had Orthodox, and then when Reform Judaism came around, some people said, "Hey, you've gone too far. We don't even recognize this as a synagogue. You're not wearing a kippah.
Mm,
You're not doing anything in Hebrew." So conservative kind of filled that gap.
okay.
The synagogue we belonged to actually was conservative.
Okay.
So,
So
yeah,
you were in that middle ground area
in
then,
the, in
growing
the
up,
middle ground.
but more casual in your practice of it.
I was very casual, and to this day, I
Yeah.
am that high holiday Jew
Yeah.
that shows up for the big holidays. My parents have become more observant. They keep kosher now. They would keep the Sabbath, so they're not traveling. They're not driving on Saturday. It's become a bigger part of their lives. But there was always the connection. There was always, and Judaism is there's a debate about whether it's its own race. We always had that connection to the history, the
Yeah.
contributions that we've made to the world. I always took great pride in that.
Yeah.
There's literally 17, 18 million Jews in the world. Really no reason why they're even in any conversation. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny group of people.
Yeah.
Maybe, less than 1% of the world's population. But I think our contributions just far exceed our numbers. Whether you look at Nobel Prize winners or
Mm-hmm.
any
Innovations, technology.
science,
Yeah.
the innovations, it's really remarkable. So I've always taken pride in that.
Yeah. And so when you were, how did you contextualize these things when you were younger, when you were that kid at camp? Like, did it mean anything, or was it just, hey, I'm going to the mountains? So,
No, it always meant something. I would never say I wasn't Jewish, and
Yeah.
and I can recall a couple incidences, and whether it be junior high school, elementary school, where someone made a remark about Jews, and I would physically respond.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was unusual for your type of response,
No, I
or is
have
that
a temper.
normal? You had a temper. That was normal.
I've mellowed out, but
You mellowed out.
I could be provoked.
Yeah.
So
So how many teeth did you knock out? Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
well, but I did. Um, I certainly I know that size was not a deterrent,
Yeah.
so it didn't matter to me what how big the person was. If you made a comment that I think was anti-Semitic, I would respond. I certainly would
Yeah.
not. I would not put my head down and pretend it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So,
So how does that evolve as you go through high school and become a young
mm,
adult and get into your career?
yeah, well, 99% of the time it's a non-issue.
Mm-hmm.
My religious beliefs. If someone wants to have a conversation about them, I'm happy to have that conversation. It's funny, as an attorney, I have had more than one client say, "You're Jewish, right?" I say, "Yeah." And they say, "Oh, good. I want a Jewish lawyer." Thanks. So it's, yeah,
Yeah.
I've never had, as a professionally, I've never had a negative experience
Yeah. Yeah.
with being
Well,
Jewish.
was there any connection to that in becoming a lawyer or becoming a bankruptcy lawyer?
We tend, there's certain professions people tend to go to. And you will find a lot of Jews in the legal profession. And I believe in large part it's because we have been reading a document for thousands of years and having arguments over that document, and that being the Torah, the
Mm-hmm.
five books. And there's the Talmud goes beyond the Torah. Um, there are interpretations of the Torah. We've been
Mm-hmm.
doing that for 3,000 plus years and having conversations about it. So I do
Mm-hmm.
think there's something in our DNA that makes us the legal field to be very attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have this book, you have this bankruptcy code, and it's 1,000 pages, and you've got to dissect it and interpret it.
Mm.
It's not clear, and there's ways of going through it. So I do think the profession is geared towards Jews. I think we've been doing
Yeah.
the same thing
Yeah.
for 2,000 plus years,
Yeah.
interpreting a book.
Yeah. Now let's shift into the state of Israel. Like, what was your connect? I mean, you obviously grew up in the U.S., but you have a connection to the state. Tell me more about that. How that evolved.
Yeah, so again, our first visit was 1977. I was introduced to cousins who my grandparents made the first trip. In my family, the first people, before I was born, my grandparents took a boat to Israel, and they discovered some cousins that had survived the Holocaust. On the boat, they actually have a group that would get names and where you lived, and because my grandparents came from the Ukraine, Russia
Oh, okay. Yeah.
region. They came before the Germans in the 30s and 40s. I always tell people, if you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, that's the story.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, life was not easy. And thankfully, because the Russians were so bad, my grandparents left before the Germans got there, because when the Germans arrived, people weren't getting out.
Yeah.
Um, but they found cousins. So I know on our first trip, we were able to meet cousins who had been in Israel, who had fought for Israel at its independence. One cousin has a fascinating story that he had fought against British rule and had been incarcerated in Cyprus, who escaped. They arrested him again. They put him in prison in Kenya. So there was that first connection that, now I met someone who physically was
Wow.
here when the country was founded and
Yeah.
fought for its independence. It's like meeting someone that was in the colonial militia under Washington, George Washington.
Yeah.
It's the
What year
birth
was
of the
that?
country. 1948 was when Israel accepted statehood.
Okay.
The UN partitioned the region, Israel accepted in 1948. I think its Independence Day is mid-May of 48. And Palestine was given its own territory, um, and they rejected it. They rejected independence.
Yeah.
Because they
So
weren't going
so
to share the
and
land.
they say that again.
They weren't going to share the land. They rejected the partition. They rejected any sort of Jewish presence in that region.
Okay.
And that continues to today.
Yeah. So help us, I guess, tell us a little bit of that history. Then, from that point to now, in terms of the state's history, as you
Well,
see
I
it.
mean, if you
Yeah.
go back, we have a book over 3,000 years old that you would call the Old Testament. We refer to it as the five books or the Torah, but it physically describes the region and
Mm-hmm.
describes our exodus from Egypt
Mm-hmm.
and our arrival in that region, literally 3,000 plus years ago. That we're
Yeah.
there, and we built Jerusalem, and there are coins, and there are Israeli Jewish kings and Solomon and David and Saul, and it went on for hundreds of years that we had this
Mm-hmm.
presence. So, I mean, you can go way back, and we have a connection to that piece of land. An Orthodox person would say this is where God put us. Abraham was told to come here. I don't necessarily want to make the argument on the religious grounds.
Mm.
Mine's more historical, that there has been a Jewish presence there for over 3,000 years. Fast forward, you've got, real quickly, Babylonians. We build a temple, a big temple, right? It's the only temple. When you want to go to pray, you go to the temple. And it's sacked, destroyed by the Babylonians. We're dispersed. We're sent to Babylon. There's a short period where we're out of we've been kicked out of the land of Israel. We return, and then the Romans come, and around the time of Jesus, there's Roman occupation, and there's an uprising, and the Romans destroy the temple, the second destruction of the temple. And this time we are again dispersed, and the Romans actually create the name Palestine. They want to divorce the Jews from the land, so they rename the land, and the
Mm.
land becomes Palestine. And then for the next 2,000 years, we are sometimes invited to a place, and then ultimately kicked out. So, and you can see the population. It goes, there's a golden age, they call it, under Spain and Portugal. Actually, under Muslim rule, things are much better for us than under the Europe. Western Europe is in the throes of the Dark Ages. It's a time of great scientific discovery, enlightenment for the Muslim world, and the Jews are thriving in Egypt and Morocco and Spain. And then, you I love history. I was a history major,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm gonna do this
Okay.
all
Yeah.
the
Go
time.
ahead.
But the Inquisition occurs in the 1490s in Spain and Portugal, and now we're actually invited to Eastern Europe. The Polish
Mm.
kings say, "Come, we'll take you." There's a dispersal, and we're predominantly in that Poland, Russia region from 1490s until really the Holocaust, until the 1940s. That's where most Jews are living. So, as things get bad in Europe, there is a movement, there is a Zionist movement is reborn, and it's a desire out of necessity that we need to have, as Jews, we need to have a country, a place where we are safe. We can't keep moving around. And what's really remarkable is that the religion and the people have survived 2,000 years of exile, 2,000 years of not having a piece of land. It's really unheard of.
Yeah.
If you took the
Mm-hmm.
Irish out of Ireland and they wandered around for 2,000 years, would they still exist? The Irish were horribly oppressed, but they always had that piece of land. And we didn't have that.
Yeah.
It's really, really unusual that someone would survive 2,000 years of
Yeah.
disbursement.
Without that sovereignty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So there's this Zionist movement, and a lot of the land in Israel was actually purchased in the late
Mm-hmm.
1800s, the early 1900s. There's any land that was for sale, there were groups, the Jewish National Fund, the Rothschilds, there were people purchasing it, and it was swamp, it was desert, And their Arab owners were more than happy to sell it at an inflated rate because they thought these Jews were crazy. So a lot, I don't know the percentage, but a lot of the property was actually purchased. People don't realize that. So there's this movement to return. Things aren't good in Europe. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the
Now,
Holocaust. Yeah.
yeah, well, let's pause there. So there's a lot in the news, and it seems to be a lot of controversy around just this Zionist idea. Kind of, can you help us make sense of why that is, and what
Yeah.
the different points of view are?
Right. So the modern founder of the Zionist movement is a man named Theodor Herzl. He was in Basel, Switzerland. Not particularly religious, but he was observing what was going on, and there was a famous trial in France called the Dreyfus Affair, in which a Jewish member of the French military was accused of spying. Just it was a circus of a trial. He's convicted. He's sent to what is it, Devil's Island, I think, or if you're familiar with the movie Papillon. And it's just it's a watershed moment where he realizes, we don't have a history here. We're in trouble here in Europe. Things are not good. In addition to that, the Russians had a new czar, and he was very anti-Semitic, and there was a lot of pogroms, as they're called,
Mm-hmm.
massacres were occurring
Yeah.
throughout Eastern Europe. So there was this modern movement that we need a safe place, and Israel made sense. Israel made sense. It was not heavily populated. It was under Ottoman control. Ottomans are the modern day Turks. So it was a Muslim country. And I think initially there was, everybody was okay with it. As the numbers grew, I think there was a backlash from the local population. And there were incidences and attacks and kind of that modern day battle started between their population and the Jewish population. And then fast forward to the Holocaust, literally eliminated a third of the world's population. I think emerging from that, European countries still didn't want the survivors. There weren't many survivors, but they still weren't
Mm-hmm.
opening their arms. And the British had assumed control of the region after the Ottoman Empire fell in the First World War in 17. And now it's under British rule, and the British devise a plan that we're going to partition the country. The Jewish cities, we're going to give to the land of Israel, and the other cities will give to Palestine. And they also, they literally carved up the world after World War One. The French took Syria and Lebanon. The British got Egypt and Israel and Iraq, and they were the victors, and they carved up the world.
Yeah.
So the British are occupying. The British are in bad shape especially after World War II. They're not able to hang on to all these colonies around the world, nor are the French, and they decide at some point we're gonna leave. We're leaving on
Yeah.
May 14th, 1948. It's the UN's problem now. The United Nations has been created, and they can deal with it. But there was always under the British rule, there had been promises made to both sides that this is your land. Eventually,
Yeah.
we will. And especially there was no oil there, so they really had no interest. There was oil in Iran and
Yeah.
Iraq, so they had more of an interest. This is a hostile geography. It's desert in the south. There are mountains in the north. There's swamps. I mean, it's just not. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. Um,
And
but
so to
yeah.
pull back, so those that are critical of, I guess, the Zionist movement, what is it that they're saying, and how are they framing it?
Yeah, so I've watched some of the everything's on YouTube. So I've watched students because the student movement in this country on the universities
Mm-hmm.
has been shocking to me and
Yeah.
to Jews. How anti-Zionistic it is, and this. What I'm hearing is that Israel, that they're colonizers and it's an apartheid state. It's. I almost don't want to take on those. Uh, it's just slander.
Mm,
It's not based in any. No one who's been there can would say that this is an apartheid state or that Israel was a colonizer. It's almost like having discussion, did the Holocaust occur? I'm not having that conversation. We know it occurred
mm,
because the Germans kept great records. That's how we know. And we have survivors and we have footage. And it's if you go to Israel, every road sign is in Hebrew, English, and Arabic.
mm-hmm.
They're Arab members of the parliament. parliament, the equivalent of Congress. 20% of the population is Israeli Arab. They're Arabs that live in Israel. They, for the most part, are Muslim, and their mosques, their towns that are predominantly Arab, and they're free to practice. They're free to become doctors, lawyers, whatever they want, accountants. Um, they have full rights as
Yeah.
Israelis. So the apartheid argument. I guess what would they say? They would say this was our land. We were here, and
Mm-hmm.
these folks came from Europe. We've been here for the last 500-600 years, and it's our land. There, again, as I had said, much of the land had been purchased. Tel Aviv is a strictly Jewish city. It was designed, built, and created by Jews. Nearby, there was Jaffa, which was a predominantly Arab city and still is today. There were events in 1948 when there was a war. Israel's independence was declared, and again, the Jews accepted. The UN said these are the lines, and the lines are horrible. They're horribly drawn. It was inevitable that there was going to be, and they knew that there was going to be a war. So they drew the lines, and my personal opinion is they didn't expect Israel to survive.
Mm,
The British were not pro-Israel. They were very much
yeah.
pro-Arab. The Arabs had
I
the
mean, it
oil.
sounds like a lot of these problems go back to the British uh,
Absolutely, all over the
era.
world.
Yeah.
All over the world.
Yeah.
The lines drawn,
Yeah.
whether it be India and Pakistan, millions were killed when they departed.
Yeah.
Countries all over the world, yeah. But, not just the British, but any truly, those were colonizers. We had
Yeah.
no power coming out of the Holocaust. We had no. There was no power. We weren't in power. We were
Yeah.
absolutely. We were displaced. We were devastated, and the dream of a homeland, someplace where Jews could be safe, and Israel made sense. But in 1948, when they drew those lines, the Arabs attacked immediately. The armies of Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, probably leaving one out, Syria, immediately attacked, and remarkably, the Jews who did not have a established army or air force were able to survive that. So in that moment, were there Palestinians that were displaced? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They lost. They lost a war, and there were areas that Palestinians had been living, and they were pushed out. Yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt. So the argument, hey, this was our country. We were here. They were there in the immediate. They were present. If they had accepted the boundaries, I think they'd still be there, the ones that were displaced. And
Yeah.
at the same time, the Jews of Morocco, Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Iran were expelled. So you now
Mm,
have not only the European Jews that had survived the Holocaust that were trying to come in, now you have almost 1 million Jews from Arab countries that have been expelled from their country. They'd been there for hundreds of years and were very successful, and now they're coming in. So you have this population, you have a need for land. So yeah, that's a big moment, 1948.
yeah.
Palestinians should be celebrating 76 years of independence, as Israel does. That was a moment where they could have accepted it, but they rejected it. They didn't want to share the land, and that rejection continues.
So how does that play out from then to today, like bring us up to the present?
Well, all right, so the West Bank is occupied by Jordan after the War of Independence, as Israel calls it, in 1948. The West Bank's occupied by Jordan. Gaza's occupied by Egypt. Syria's in the Golan Heights. And there's a lot of saber rattling where the Arabs are threatening to wipe the Jews out, push them into the sea, and relatively quiet until 1967 when all sides are poised to attack and Israel launches a preemptive strike, eliminates the Egyptian Air Force, and then they still get attacked from all sides. And in 6 days, in 1967, Israel pushes the Egyptians back, takes the Sinai Peninsula, which is a massive piece of land. It's bigger than the state of Israel itself. And they successfully enter Jerusalem, which we were not allowed in the old city, the Jewish sites in Jerusalem. We had no access to from 48 to 67. We didn't. in 48, they were not able to successfully liberate Jerusalem. So it was in Jordanian hands. And in 67, Israel takes the Golan Heights, takes Jordan, takes the Gaza Strip, takes the Sinai Peninsula, takes the West Bank, and Jerusalem's liberated. We're able to go to the Western Wall, which is the most holy site. It's an outer wall of the old temple in Jerusalem. It had been used, just defiled by, they used to pile their garbage there, the Jordanians. So now we have these properties, we have this land. And that's in 67. 73, the Arabs attack again and almost win. They come really close to winning. Um, and the U.S. does really come to Israel's rescue. Nixon, without waiting for Congress, gets the supplies to Israel that Israel needs to fight off that attack. 4 years later, Israel's sitting down with Anwar Sadat and making peace under Carter. I think 79, they signed a peace accord. So the idea was always, all right, we have this land. In exchange for peace, you can have the land back.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it with Egypt. Is it a close relationship? No, but there is no threat from Egypt. Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula. So we know Israel will give back land in exchange for peace. They've done it. We've seen it. They gave back the Sinai Peninsula, which is huge.
Yeah.
Israel's smaller than New Jersey. Israel's tiny, tiny. If you look at the West Bank, from the West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea, where the West Bank sticks out the most, it goes the furthest west, it's about 10 miles. So you
Okay.
have 10 miles of Israel, and then they could cut it off in a moment if they had the ability to. They could cut that country, Israel, in two. So Israel gets back the land. They have a harder time with the Palestinians in the West Bank. You see the rise of the PLO, which is
Mm-hmm.
under Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat really makes a name for himself when he murders 11 Israeli athletes in 1972 at the Munich Olympics. That puts him on the map. 2 years later, he's standing in front of the UN with a pistol on his side, getting a standing ovation. So I think there has been a history of they're kind of rewarded for bad behavior. I don't know how
Yeah.
else to say it.
Yeah. They're valorizing those bad behaviors. Yeah.
It's I think it's a unique. I can't understand it, but there's something about a strong Jewish state that really bothers a lot of people. And so, part of the reaction is, well, we see Israel looking like the dominant, the stronger player here, and they have to be the stronger player to remain alive. So, militarily they are, but there's really a backlash, and it's really, really, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't know why
Mm.
Israel is treated differently than other
Yeah.
countries, but it feels that way to me.
Is there
Um,
any other history worth pointing out before we jump to the present or to the October
I would point out that
2023?
under Clinton you had the so-called Oslo Accords, and this was a agreement by Israel to withdraw from Gaza and to withdraw from a lot of the Palestinian territory. Jerusalem is kind of a non-starter for Israel. When it was in the hands of the Arabs, we didn't have any access to our holy sites. The old city of Jerusalem, which is a very small place, it's really kind of non-negotiable, and everything, I think about 98% of the West Bank was given back under the Oslo Accords.
Mm-hmm.
And the deal was you get to self-rule in the West Bank and in Gaza. The Palestinians can self-rule. Israel will pull out. But in exchange, there has to be security. There has to be peace. And the response was an intifada. Yasser Arafat went back, and within weeks, people are walking into cafes and blowing themselves up, and walking onto buses, blowing themselves up. So Israel literally built a wall to keep the more dangerous places cut off, and really stepped up security. But the Palestinians were given control of the West Bank, and they had an election, and they elected Abbas, and they've never had another election. And
Yeah.
in Gaza, they have an election, and they elect Hamas. So you have two different governing groups in the West Bank versus Gaza. And Israel pulls out of Gaza. Israel dismantled Jewish settlements in Gaza, about 10,000 Jews were forcibly removed by the Israeli army from Gaza and brought back into the modern boundaries of Israel. And the result in 2005 was there's not a single Jew in Gaza. Um, and almost immediately, Hamas starts firing rockets. And they're funded. They're funded by European countries. They're funded by Qatar. They're funded by the UN. And money that is given to them to build whatever they're supposed to build, schools, hospitals. They may build these things, but they're also building tunnels. And they have a
Mm-hmm.
tunnel system under the city in Gaza, under the country, that is more extensive than the New York subway system. It's remarkable what they're finding, the scope of these tunnels. And they
Yeah.
also have built missiles, and they've been firing missiles at Israel on a fairly consistent basis. They are not well aimed. They're crude. Once in a while, someone might be injured or killed. It's not Israel has a defense
Yeah.
system that they
Can
built.
you give us the scope of that? Because I think it's hard to appreciate just how many missiles are sent at them. Like when you think about the last decade, like
Yeah,
on a regular basis,
it's on
right?
a regular basis. Either missiles. They also do these incendiary balloons that when they land, they set the
Mm-hmm.
crops on fire. Israel's very agricultural in the south. That's where most of their food is grown. Yeah, it's you know if you have grown up in southern Israel, you have if you're a child, you look at every playground has a bomb shelter. It's become a way of life. You just understand that if the sirens go off, you have to get to shelter. But people have
Yeah.
lived there.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, just like take it to like imagine if I'm in my neighborhood and I was just shooting my gun at the houses nearby,
right,
like
right.
every day.
But meanwhile, you still take your children to school. You take them to the playground, and
And they,
you just
yeah,
have to be vigilant. Yeah,
it's a pretty wild dynamic. Yeah.
it's amazing what people can get used to. And this recent trip, what struck me was how normal everything felt, and it really felt normal. And I know we'll get there. But yeah, so since Hamas has been in power, their goal, their stated goal, their mission is the destruction of Israel. And it's the same with Hezbollah. And this is the governing group. So are all Palestinians interested in destroying Israel? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it's as if you have this ruling party. They're in power. Now, there's never going to be another election. This is not a democracy. And do
Yeah.
they rule through force? Do they rule through fear of will they kill their own people? Absolutely. If you stand up and you say, well, maybe we should talk to the Israelis, you're dead. That doesn't happen. It's hard to understand that someone's existence is solely to destroy someone
Hmm.
else. That's
Yeah.
a bizarre concept. But that's they're jihadists. They're on a mission from their God. It's a bastardization of their religion. Um,
Yeah.
and at the risk of offending people, there was a time when Christianity had its own these
Hmm.
kings in Spain and Portugal, and they were sending people out to either convert or
Or
kill
die. Yeah.
or die. So there was a time in Christianity where the world experienced something very similar, where
Hmm.
conquistadors were going all over the world and killing in the name of their
Yeah.
God. So that's
Yeah.
what we're kind of experiencing now with Islam. There's a perversion of their religion, and it's led by Iran. They're that's a theocracy, Iran, but there's not a single democracy in that whole region. So
Yeah.
you can't vote these people out.
Yeah.
They will
I mean,
not
we
leave.
underestimate just the power and the value of a democracy that if you have bad leaders, you can get rid of them. But if you have a regime that is dictatorial or totalitarian, you are stuck with them unless you overthrow them.
Right, right,
Yeah.
and that takes arms. And these
Hmm.
the governing bodies in Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah, Lebanon is not a functioning country. It is ruled by a militia, and their stated aim is the destruction of Israel. That's their
Yeah.
reason for
Now,
existing.
yeah. Now, how have the attitudes of Israelis, just like thinking about before October, so 2023, before um,
Right.
the massacre, the decade before that, how had sort of the attitudes and perspective
Yeah.
evolved
So,
of people
so
in Israel?
like this country, we have liberals, we have conservatives, we have people in the middle, we have extremists. It's the same in any country. So there are people on the far right. There are Israelis that would make the argument that the West Bank is traditionally called Judea Samaria, that this was given to us by God. God ordained that this should be our land. It's not to be shared. Someone on the far right would make that argument. We shouldn't have any Arabs in our midst. And that's an extreme view. And then on the far left, you had these communities that were near Gaza that had Gazan employees. People came every day on a daily basis. They worked in the fields, tended to be more menial jobs, but there were Gazans who were coming on a daily basis to work in Israel. And what has been learned is that this operation on October 7th, 2023 was really well planned and planned for a long time. And the people that were coming to work and had relationships with Israelis, and some Israelis would say, we consider them friends. They were really doing surveillance. They would come back and they would say, well, there's a house here. It's got 4 people living in it. There's another house here. They diagrammed all the surrounding communities that are near the
Mm-hmm.
Gaza Strip. And
So
not only
they
that,
befriended in order to do the surveillance, so that when they did the attack, it
and
would be more
where they
effective.
had the threat when they got home, did someone put a gun to their head and say, hey, diagram this city or kill a family member? Yeah, it's very possible. But yeah, they know that they have found maps where the family name was listed. They knew every household. They knew the makeup of the towns. They knew who had the key to the armaments, because it's hard to understand, but in these Israeli villages or cities, not everybody's walking around with rifles, but there is an armament. There is a place where, in case of an emergency, there was someone who had access that could kind of arm the Israeli population. So when this invasion occurred, they they knew where to go. They knew who to get. They knew what they were doing. It was very well planned, and it's really viewed as a game changer in Israel. And I did take a tour of these sites close to Gaza that were badly impacted. The biggest massacre occurred at a music festival. I think over 300 people, young people, were killed at a music festival. This was
And
this.
they weren't just killed.
They were
It,
massacred. They were raped. They were tortured. They were hacked up. It was brutal. They believe that a lot of the Gazans that were invading were doped up on speed. They were on amphetamines. They were drugged. The brutality is unbelievable. And I mean old people, women, children. It wasn't just Jews either. They were killing everybody. There were 39 or 40 Thai migrant workers who
mm,
were massacred. What the
and
Thai
Americans as well.
Americans, Brits, everybody from all over
Yeah.
the world. Israel has a migrant population that's there. Thai, for some reason, Thailand's a big place where a lot of Thai workers, migrant workers,
Mm-hmm.
um, were working in the fields, and they slaughtered them. Yeah, it didn't. It's not. Oh, you're Israeli, we're going to kill you. Oh, you're Thai. Well, we don't have a problem with the Thai. They came to kill, and they killed about 1,200 people. Took another 300 back to Gaza as I've heard stories. Some have
Mm-hmm.
actually been enslaved, but mostly they're being held as bargaining chips.
And
Um,
how many of the hostages have been released, and how many are still
yeah,
captured
so there
as
was
of?
there was an initial. I think they say there's about 94, 95 that are believed still being held. How many of those they know are living, they're not sure. To me, it's been disappointing how few were actually rescued. So there was an initial 33 or so that were returned in 2023, and then a year went by, nobody was released. Israel's recovered some bodies. They did free 6 or 7 in one operation. but I think the number I hear is about 94 that remain,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know if they're alive or dead. And to Israel, it doesn't matter. The idea is to bring them home, whether they're living or not. It's to bring them home, and Israel will give up Palestinian inmates for a body. They've done it before, and they'll do it again. And they tend to give hundreds for one Israeli hostage. They'll give up hundreds of Palestinians in order to bring back one. And the other side knows this. And they know they'll get their people back whether they give up a body, a corpse, or a living hostage. So,
Yeah. In terms of geography, what was this talking about the massacre itself? Like, what was the scale of the area that was invaded?
yeah, so it was an outdoor concert, and I got to visit it. I took a tour with a survivor, and the gentleman happened to be a tour guide, and he was there during the attack. Lost some friends. He said about 6 months he couldn't function. He just stayed in his room, and at some point he was getting some therapy, and he just decided he's going to develop a tour of the region. He's going to talk about it. He's going to bring people to bear witness. And he's put together a tour that was really, really remarkable. Whenever you visit, like if I visit a museum and it's a museum and there are artifacts there, okay. But if you actually go to a site, where Kennedy was shot, where you're physically standing or where Martin Luther King was assassinated, there's something really, really powerful about being in that place where it actually occurred. And you're looking
Mm,
through the eyes of the assassin. So to be in that space, to see, and he played for us a video. He was videotaping. It's an electronic. I can't stand the music. It's an electronic music festival. And it's a small country, Israel. So he said there were about 4,000 people attending. There were different stages. You camped. There was no buildings around. It was basically an open space for this concert, and people camped or slept in their cars. What had never occurred before, he said when you would hear sirens, you knew to either get down, you would duck down, or if you could get to a shelter, you got to a concrete bunker or shelter. But the concern was always the shrapnel, that these missiles would hit, and they're packed with nails and other pieces designed to inflict injury. And he said that's the danger. The missile hits one spot, but then the shrapnel expands and can hit anybody around. Or if the missile's intercepted, it still has to fall. He says that's the danger. He says the danger was never that we were going to be invaded. So
mm-hmm.
people made their way to these bunkers, and they're sitting in these concrete bunkers, and now you have people driving up from Gaza. They've broken through the fence, and um, they're lobbing grenades into these concrete bunkers. People were literally, no one had ever experienced what happened on October 7th. It really was
Mm-hmm.
Israel's 9/11 moment. It just, I think it was inconceivable to Israelis that this could occur, that a full-blown incursion could occur. 1,200 people were killed that day on October 7th. I've heard a stat that if you extrapolate based on the population, it's the equivalent of 36,000 Americans being slaughtered in one day. I mean, just imagine the magnitude. 9/11 was, I think, 2,500, 3,000. A horrible, horrible moment for our country. But imagine 10 times that number.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be, how do you show any restraint in the response?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think Israel had, and this is going to be the most controversial thing I say, Israel has shown restraint. War is a horrible thing, and you literally have an enemy that is burrowed underneath the city. They're burrowed underneath the hospitals. They're burrowed underneath the schools. And civilians are unfortunately going to be involved. The babies, it's heart wrenching to see the scenes that come out of Gaza, the video. But I truly believe, and I know face backlash for this, I truly believe that Israel has done as much as it can to try and protect that civilian population. But it's really, really, really almost an
Yeah.
impossible.
Could you elaborate on what are those things for people that are not familiar?
So they literally have built, their funding comes mostly from the UN. They're given money. and supplies. And so they'll take. I think I sent you some pictures. There's a town in Israel, and they actually made a menorah out of these missiles, these projectiles. And our guide said everything in this projectile came from the UN. He said this, and he's pointing to it. He said this is a water pipe. This was supposed to be for their water system. It's a pipe, and instead of using it for the water system, they turn it into a missile. He says it's fueled. He says it's fertilizer and sugar is the rocket fuel. So
Mm.
everything comes from the UN. The schools are horribly anti-Semitic. The what these kids are taught under the UN guidance. It's just it starts from a birth. These our lives are difficult, and this is the reason why. If these Jews didn't exist, we'd have great lives, and that's taught at an early age. I don't know how you unlearn it. There is a book out there, Son of Hamas, where one of the leaders, the founders of Hamas, his son actually has broken away and lives in the United States now and tours and wrote a book. But he says this is so ingrained. It's so ingrained, the hatred. Even if they made
Yeah.
peace tomorrow, you're going to have a generation, a new
Yeah.
generation come up. And that's why it doesn't seem to be an end to it. I
Yeah.
don't
Well,
I
and
don't
so in terms of the war itself, or the Gazan part of the war, what are the you mentioned that Israel is restraining itself? So could you give some specific examples of what that looks like?
they create humanitarian zones.
Mm.
They basically tell the population, we're going into this town, you need to vacate. And that's an effort, that's an attempt to protect civilian lives. The downside is they can vacate some of their military as well, can go to the humanitarian zone. We know that the hostages have been in the humanitarian zones. The ones that were just released last week, they're telling stories that they were in these humanitarian zones. So you are kind of tipping your hat. And there's stories of leaflets being dropped on areas saying, we're going to conduct operations here. They've done it with the hospitals. There have been efforts to move patients. Again, there have been efforts. I don't think you see that in the world press. And the reality is, civilians will be killed. It's a war. How many civilians did we kill in Afghanistan? How many did we kill in Iraq? Hundreds of thousands. Was that on the nightly news? No. Should have been? Maybe. Could we have been more careful? Perhaps. But war's a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing.
Yeah. So what would you say to that person who's sympathetic to the Gazans in the sense of they're just seeing all these civilians being killed in these attacks by Israel? Like, how
Right.
would you respond to them? How would you contextualize that for them?
You know, I really think that how the average Palestinian gets out from under Hamas, I'm not sure. But I really think that the the bad actor here, the one that is most responsible, are the Hamas. So I think you have to choke them off.
So walk us through why you say that and how that connects
Because they're the ones
to
building under the tunnel. There wasn't a single Israeli or a single Jew in Gaza on October 6, 2023. Not one. It was they were self-ruling. In fact, Israel provides their water, Israel provides their electricity. They were brought back in. They were forced to respond. They were forced to enter Gaza. I don't think there's a single Israeli who wants to be in Gaza. Certainly if you're a young soldier, you want to go to Gaza? There's no way. There's no way. Do you have to? Yes. Yes, because they'll continue to perfect their bombs, get stronger. So this is an unfortunate October 7th was a game changer. It really was a 9/11 moment. And just as the U.S., I think all sides rallied around the president, and we've been attacked, and we need to respond because it's not going to stop. If you don't
Mhm.
respond to it, it's not as if it's going to, oh, well, they
Yeah, it
killed the
won't magically
president.
disappear.
They're
Yeah,
happy now, that's all they wanted.
it has to be addressed in
And
some
it's
way.
not a
So
Jewish, yeah, I was going to say, it's not just an Israel-Jewish problem. These folks, Hamas, Hezbollah, they're militants. They're not accepting of any other religion or position. And, if they're
yeah,
not dealt with here, I do think, let's say Israel disappeared tomorrow. they're not stopping. They're not stopping.
Yeah.
So,
So how did the October 7th massacre, how did it, like, where were you before that? And then how did
yeah,
that event change you? And let's talk about how that shifted in terms of you eventually wanting to go to Israel yourself.
yeah. So in the beginning, I said between 1977 and 1988, I had been in Israel, I think 5 summers. From 1988 to 2019, I did not go to Israel.
Mm,
2019, I took my wife to Israel, and we spent 10, 11 days as tourists, visiting sites. Um, I didn't have any immediate plans to return. October 7th, even more than that moment, it's been the world's reaction.
mm.
And it's
Tell me more about that.
it's
And what is,
stunning to me, the anti-Israel sentiment that Israel somehow is an oppressor. Israel deserved this. Did the U.S. deserve 9/11? What did we do to deserve 9/11? That's what I would ask somebody. What did the U.S. do? You know what we did? If you ask bin Laden, I heard in an interview, we were on Saudi territory. During the first Gulf War, we put troops in Saudi Arabia. This was so offensive to bin Laden that he then set out on his campaign to attack this country. It was so reprehensible, so disgusting to bin Laden that American troops set foot in Saudi Arabia, even though it was to help another Muslim country, the Kuwaitis. That was our
mhm.
initial reason for being there. So, what did Israel do to deserve October 7th? That would be my question for that person. So for the world to literally have arrest warrants out for the Israeli leaders, that's unprecedented. And that's what's happened. You have countries, attacks on synagogues all throughout Europe. Australia's a real mess. I spoke to some Australians who were in Israel with me this last time, and they're terrified. They're not getting support they feel from their government, and they're really, really, they don't know where to go. And feel that their ability to stay in Australia is coming to an end. And same with the French Jews. And that's not new. Things have not been great. As the Muslim population has increased throughout Europe, things have gotten worse for the Jewish population. So again, it all comes down to, well, where do we go? Where's our safe place? And the answer is Israel. Israel is the safe place for a Jew. It's the only predominantly Jewish country in the world. It's the only country where a Jew from anywhere can get citizenship
Mhm.
immediately.
Yeah.
I can go to Israel tomorrow and become a citizen. And that's the value of Israel. And that I've always understood, that, God forbid, things got bad enough here in the U.S. that there's now some place for us to go. When it got bad in Europe, in the 40s, we had no place to go. The world shut its doors. The doors were
Mhm.
shut.
And
You
yeah.
couldn't go to the U.S. if you were a poor Russian Jew. You didn't have access to anywhere.
Yeah.
And the result was that millions died. So now we not only do we have a place, but they'll come get us.
Mhm.
They did it in Holland. The Israelis landed some planes in Holland. There were 3,000 soccer fans that were attending a soccer match in Holland and in the Netherlands, I should say. And there were some incidences where they were being beaten up and being attacked by groups. And the feeling was the local police weren't helping out. So Israel literally sent some, it's not 747s anymore, whatever they send, it's 727s, and brought them home. And they would do, I explain to people, whether you're observant a Jew or not, the value of Israel to a Jew is, if things got bad here,
You have someone that'll take you. Yeah.
they'll
And
take
get
it.
you.
Why not? They'll
Yeah.
come get us, whether
Yeah.
you're observant or not. And that's the value of Israel for me.
You're not alone. You're not going to be forsaken.
Yeah, we have an army, and B, and as a history major, I can tell you that at some point our welcome will end in the United States.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's inevitable. This country's been great for many immigrant groups, and it's a good place right now. But if you look at the college campuses, this is a concern. This is a generation that is being raised to. I mean, there's a couple of people set themselves on fire, protests the U.S. Support of Israel. I mean, that's dedication. So there's fear. There's fear in
Yeah.
the Jewish community. What we're seeing on the
Yeah.
college campuses. And I didn't vote for Trump, but there's a shining light in Trump's ascendancy, and that is that the hope is we won't tolerate the anti-Jewish and anti-American sentiment on our college campuses, that there will be repercussions, that these people will be reined in. Because I see people literally in the Palestinian, wrapped in the Palestinian flag and the keffiyeh, screaming not only anti-Israel sentiments, but anti-American.
Yeah.
And the free speech is a fine line, but to me, these are threats against the country and specifically against me. I feel it. So it's very
Hmm.
personal.
Yeah.
Um, so October 7th, and the reaction to it from the world that's the shocking part. Am I
Mhm.
shocked that Hamas attacked and killed 1,200? You know, yeah, it shouldn't have happened. Israelis should have been able to defend it. But most shocking is the world's reaction, that Israel is the
Hmm.
pariah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because just the idea of the reaction being the catalyst, because I can relate to that in a lot of ways. When you see something horrible happen and then you see people either celebrate it or go along with it, whatever it might be,
Right.
like it has a very, from my own experience, like it's stuck with me, those moments in my journey.
Yeah, that's the shocking part is the reaction of the college campuses and other world leaders, the issuing
Yeah.
arrest warrants for the president of Israel, prime minister. That's the shocking part.
Yeah.
So
So that
um,
starts to brew in you, and if so
yeah,
that's 2003. So about a year,
right,
that's brewing. So how do you go from that kind of
right. So
wow,
yeah,
this reaction,
so
to
my
I'm going to help? Yeah.
I'm sorry. So my
Yeah.
brother, who is
Yeah.
more observant, who wears a yarmulke, a kippah, he has been concerned about the role of the universities. He's been expressing it for years that there's this real threat to Judaism coming out of the universities. And he's been in tune with it. And I haven't been ignorant to it. I just think it's the level and the vitriol is so shocking to me. So he has he's not independently wealthy. He needs to work, but he's always expressed a love of Israel, and eventually, he's younger than me. He's in his mid-50s, and I think he always thought, well, one day I'd love to retire and go to Israel. There was not he was not going anytime soon. After October 7th, he says, I'm out of here. And again,
Yeah.
it's the reaction. It's the reaction
Hmm.
of the government, of our president at the time. It was
Yeah.
nobody was happy with Biden's reaction. He tried to support both sides, and both sides felt that they were being not
Hmm.
supported. So he sells his home in Georgia, and he says, "I'm going." He has 3 kids; they're all college age, and he left. So he went to Israel. He knew where he wanted to be. He had been there many times, and he found an apartment and sold his house in Atlanta and bought an apartment. So he is there. He has, and it's called Aliyah. That's when someone becomes an Israeli citizen, you make Aliyah, which literally means going up. So he has
Hmm.
made Aliyah. He's trying to figure out how he's going to make a living. I think from the sale of the house, he's good for a year or two, but eventually he's going to
Yeah.
make a living. And then my nephew, his son, was in Israel on October 7th. So
Wow.
we had a first-hand view. We were able to communicate through WhatsApp, and he's experiencing it because he was in school at the time in Israel, college age, and he starts to raise money, and he says we're going to buy supplies, whatever the soldiers need, and take the supplies down to Gaza. So my brother said, well, you can raise money. You're not driving to the Gaza border. We'll find someone else to deliver whatever you were able to purchase. So he's buying. Winter was approaching. He's collecting money and collected thousands of dollars from people. It's thermals, it's fleece jackets, it's whatever they need. Israel called up about 300,000 reservists. So they have their standing army, and these are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. Some people are lifetime, but most of them serve their year and a half, 2 years, and they're done. And they're
Yeah.
children. These are 18, 19-year-old kids, and they serve their time and they're done. And hopefully they're not involved in any conflict. Well, now you have a full-blown conflict. There's a war. So 300,000 reservists are called up. Well, now these are teachers, bus drivers, doctors. These are folks that have been out of service for some time, and there's not a supply chain for these guys. So they're having to provide everything. They've got to find their old helmet. They've got to find their firearm for them. But the uniform probably doesn't fit anymore. If you called me up 20 years after I've served, my uniform's not going to fit me anymore. So there's a great need to not only provide for these folks, but now to fill the positions that they're leaving. And school closed. School closed for that whole semester. There was no school in Israel. So this country has been shut down. And on October 8th, Hezbollah from Lebanon starts firing into Israel. And they are close enough that they don't even have to fire missiles. They've got these shoulder launchers, and they have devastated cities in the north of Israel and destroyed them. And again, I've never seen CNN or ABC or NBC. I've never seen anybody really walking through those communities, but they were devastated. And so now you have tens of thousands of people that are being housed in hotels in the interior of the country. And the government paid for a certain number of months, and then you've got to do what you can do. So there's this country is under siege from all directions. Hezbollah in the north, you've got Hamas, you've got the West Bank. Arabs are always a threat, and now missiles are coming from Yemen. It's a fourth front. So this country's really under siege, and they can't afford to lose a war because it'll be the end of the country. And I wouldn't count on anyone to bail them out. I'm not counting on the U.S. to help them out. I don't think it happens. So they really, really are on their own. But I'm hearing from my nephew who now has joined the Israeli military. My brother's now there, and it's now very personal. It's always been personal, but it's even more personal now. Now I know people, and I had cousins even before that I
Yeah.
knew were there. So yeah, there's this feeling of what am I doing? How dare I continue with my everyday life? You know, I go to work, I come home, I've got a good life here. But how can I do nothing other than spend money? And so I would spend money and found a Facebook group that has a woman started who also was in the country on October 7th, just visiting her brother. And she sets up this Facebook group, and its goal is really to kind of say, hey, this is the need. We need people to pick lemons. We need people to pick pomegranates. We need people to help Israeli kids learn Hebrew. They post whenever there's a funeral for a soldier. It'd be nice to have a big presence at the funeral. You can visit injured soldiers in the hospital. A lot of it is preparation of meals or providing them with jackets and thermals, as I said. The reservists, I spent a day with a woman who was collecting shampoos and toothpaste and toothbrushes and
Yeah.
just everyday things. And again, the reservists were not, they were supposed to provide everything. So they're just called up. They're not provided anything. So there's this real need, and with this Facebook group, I started to read about different opportunities. Most of them would direct you to a WhatsApp site, and there was a hotel or two that kind of became a staging
The hub.
area, the hub for this group. So now I'm reading, I'm like, okay, I can do this, I can do that, I can pick lemons, I can, whatever. So I start to inquire. I did find a organized group that had been around apparently for years, where people could go and kind of volunteer for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever you want to do. And they put you on a base, and you're doing menial tasks, and the idea is to free up someone that would be doing that. If you weren't there, they would have to have people doing these tasks. So I signed up for it. There was a vetting. I had an interview. They're most concerned with what's your reason for coming, and And so I signed up for that. So that it was going to be 1 week of that, and then the other week I was going to be at the hotel and just I was just going to wait for opportunities. And I did that the first week. So I show up at the hotel. Monday was a rain out. Monday I got there late Sunday night. Get to the hotel. Monday raining the whole day. Israel has a rainy season. It's the winter. It's just a washout, and I'm exhausted. So I'm like, I'm not doing anything today. Let me get my legs. Tuesday, I show up at this place. It's a distribution center, really hard to find. Just it took me an hour to finally get there. I get there, and there's one other guy there, and he says, "Well, I guess they're not showing up today." So another lost day. I was really disappointed. And then I started to talk to other people. Found a place nearby my hotel. There's a woman who from Chicago, and she is living in Israel, and she just says, kind of what my nephew was doing was collecting money. She's found out what are the needs. She has like this checklist that she gives to the different logistics, the different bases. What do you need? And she's buying it. And so we were putting together packets, and soldiers would show up and on behalf of so and so, we would load the cars. It's not weaponry. It's literally, I mean, okay, pocket knives. It was fleece and thermals and jackets and shampoo and toothpaste and just some kind of necessities again that weren't getting to everybody. And just to hear from these guys how appreciative they were. The idea that I'm thinking I'm only giving 2 weeks. It's not enough. It's not enough. And what I'm hearing from them is thank you. Why would you leave your job for 2 weeks and do this?
Yeah.
And having that conversation, just feeling the appreciation. That day when I was working, there was a gentleman from England, and afterwards we were both hungry, and we went for a walk and to get something to eat. I don't know how, but it's an interesting place, Israel. It's very the people from all over the world. Someone said the U.S. may be a melting pot, but Israel's a salad. That you just
Mm.
have all these different people, really from all over the world. It's a young country, so we were talking, and people would overhear us what we were talking about, and literally join in the conversation. And the appreciation, the fact that someone would come, Jewish, not Jewish, that people would come, was really, really uplifting for them. So that alone, I felt like we were only touching a person here, touching a person there, but giving them, I don't know, if hope's the right word, but giving them, some solace that there are people that do care, and they're coming from long distances,
All
um,
over the world. Yeah.
all over the world, all over the world. And then the second week I did spend on a base. It was a logistics base. Um, we were given uniforms, army uniforms, um, and we were 43 in on the base I was on. All met at the airport. Once you're at the airport, they divide us into groups. We checked in, and I think it was three different groups, probably 40, 45 people, went in three different directions. So I went to a base in the south. There were 43 of us, and over the week, I would say probably a dozen were not Jewish, which
Hmm.
blew me away. I was had no personal connection to Israel. They didn't have family members, and I would ask, why are you here? Why would you do this? And they came from Australia, France, Germany, Britain, Canada, Argentina, and there was a Colombian gentleman who married this Australian woman. He was there. And it was some of them they just saw the reaction in their countries and thought that in their mind there was clearly a right and a wrong. And one guy from Britain, not Jewish, he was just appalled. He was so appalled by the reaction in his country that he just felt he had to come, felt he had to do
Yeah.
something. And for
Hmm.
some, they were devout Christians, and it was the support for the land of Israel, and it's part of the Christian teachings for fundamentalists, for evangelicals, that Israel must exist. These folks, if you are trying to speed up the return of Jesus, you know, and Israel has to exist for that to happen, and you could probably speak more about it, is really, really powerful. I mean, these folks were all in,
Yeah.
and just, and, you know, it was just really, really uplifting to see that. But there is support. If I just watch the news all day long, it would be very depressing. There's no substitute for physically being there, experiencing it, and it was uplifting. It was uplifting.
Yeah.
It
What were
was
some
for
things
me.
you learned that you didn't that changed how you saw it by being there, or that you saw?
Yeah, for me, it was you know that moment where I'm no longer just talking about it. I'm not just sending a check. I've you know, physically done something, and it was very short. It's 2 weeks out of the year. You know, I still have to make a living. I still have to work. I have clients here. Um, you know, there's only so much time that I get to travel. So for me, it was, you know, I've done something, and I've had, you know, nice reactions from people that I have told that what I've done, you know, you wanted to put me on a podcast. Okay. So that reaction has been nice, that people want to hear what I've seen and what I've observed. As far as, you know, changing,
Or
I would say
deepening,
not.
even if it's, yeah.
Well, then I plan on going back,
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
sooner rather than later. Within the year, I expect to be back there. And maybe this time I do 3 weeks. I don't know, but certainly that commitment is you know, I
Yeah, you don't
had
want to be a passive
before.
participant. You want to be actively involved at some
Yes,
level.
and for the sole reason, even though the idea was spend some money. Every restaurant, Israel depends on tourism. Tourism's a big part of
Mm,
Israel's economy, and you can't find an airline that will fly there other than the Israeli airline. I originally had a ticket on Delta. Delta canceled. Every airline, every country canceled, other than El Al. El Al is the Israeli national airline. They're the only ones flying. So Delta just announced they're going to come back April 1st. Right.
okay.
Um, so, you know, a lot of folks would not, who were thinking about visiting Israel at some time, are not going to go right now. And I don't blame them. You know, there's an uncertainty. Did I feel unsafe there? Not for a second. Not for a second. While I was in Israel, there was a terrorist attack that killed more people in New Orleans than
Mm,
Israelis. So, and
yeah.
certainly the day to day, even when things were good in 2019, when I went to Israel, people were like, "Oh, is it safe? Is it safe?" The day to day murders that we experience in Atlanta, in Georgia, more people on any given day are going to be killed in
Yeah. In
Atlanta than
America.
in Israel. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is not, it's, we have issues, we have problems,
Yeah.
you know?
How did the so when you talk to people there, like, and just about the this massacre, the war, all of these pieces, how did it make them more optimistic, more pessimistic? Do they have less hope, more
No,
hope? Are they what? How did it change how they saw it, and what they see for the future?
well, the person I asked that question, I was most interested was our guide, our tour guide, escaped being killed. And I asked him, I said, before October 7th, would you have thought we could make peace, that there's some room that we could have peace here, that we could coexist? And he said, oh yeah, absolutely. And I said, what about now? He said, no. He said, no. It's impossible. It's impossible.
Mm,
And that's very sad. And I'm sure there are folks on the other side who may have before October 7th. And I get it. If you are a Gazan and your home has been destroyed, you know, we probably made an enemy for life. I get that. And regardless of the reasons, you can't tell someone who's been displaced or their home has been destroyed, oh, this is the reason. It's because you people attacked first. You can't tell a child. We know there are going to be enemies. It's a cycle. How it ends, I don't know. Do I see an end to it? No. I really think of what Israel's doing is buying some years. So for the next 10, 15, 20 years, maybe there's peace because Israel has knocked down their ability. But is the next generation going to rise up and be, yeah, would it help if Iran wasn't a player? Iran wasn't involved in this? Yes. Does someone else fill that void? Possibly. You know, Is it likely? Probably. And I think a big reason for that is, again, you have an entire region of the world that does not have a democracy. There's no other voice other than the voice of the leaders. And there's value in there. It works, that dynamic of, your life might be hard, but it's because these people are making it hard, whether it be the Americans or the Israelis. These people are making your life hard, and it allows them to rule.
Yeah.
Um,
So what do you? So this past week, news breaks. There's a ceasefire of some sort. What do you make of that agreement situation?
we're giving back killers, giving
So
back killers.
it's a trade. Is there a trade involved in this ceasefire?
Yeah, they're going to get 2,000. They're going to get
Okay.
33, and they're going to get 2,000 Palestinian detainees, and they're killers. Some some
So
have done
it's a releasing of 2,000 criminals for the hostages.
right,
Is that
right,
okay?
right. It's it's always been. I mean, Israel literally gave back they gave back 1,000 Palestinians for one Israeli soldier that had been kidnapped a few years back. And one of the guys that was released goes on to be Sinmar. He was in jail and he was part of the release. So we know that we are releasing killers, and we know that they will continue. The question is, where do you release them to? Do you put them uh, in Madagascar, or do we
Mm,
release them to Palestinian-controlled areas?
yeah.
Um,
So you, as far as the ceasefire itself, though, in terms of, do you just see that as a temporary band-aid that eventually get ripped and reopened?
yeah, they're buying some years. They're buying some
Yeah.
years, and
Yeah.
unfortunately they'll have to keep a presence in Gaza.
Yeah.
Um, Again, there's not a Jew, not an Israeli in Gaza on October 6, 2023. There will be now.
Yeah.
They cannot not have eyes in Gaza to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Um,
So if you were to, as much, I know you want to support Israel, but in terms of like, what do you wish they would have done different? How would you criticize how they've handled things, or
oh, it
would
never
you?
should have happened.
Mm,
This was an invasion, and people need to be held accountable. They're still in the midst of their war. I think Netanyahu has a lot of explaining to do how this occurred. And I think, like anything, you'll find out that there were warning signs, and things were ignored. Um,
yeah. And are there things that he did as a leader of the country to exacerbate the issue and the
well,
problem?
he had already divided the country. The country was having all kinds of protests before October 7th. He's been in power a long time now. He gets elected. It's an election, but he's been in power a long time, and he was briefly out of power, but then worked his way back in because it's a parliamentary system. You have multiple parties, so you can form coalitions. And
Okay.
he has put himself with some very right wing. He's aligned himself with some people who would say radicals on the right hand side, on the religious side. And there are things that he wasn't being able to get done with the equivalent of their Supreme Court, and he was trying to change some laws, and
Hmm.
people were in the streets protesting. So there was a
Yeah.
real split between his party and the other main parties. So there were problems beforehand.
Yeah.
Um, as far as the reaction, to me, it's the fact that this occurred. People need to be held accountable, and ultimately he was the guy in charge on that day. Um,
And do
so
you think he's going to be held accountable for that?
within Israel, ultimately I do. When this has settled down, and I think he knows it. So some may say, well, he's keeping this going because he knows once it's over,
Mm,
he's gonna
he's done.
there's gonna be inquiries. So yeah, I think that's a problem. He's on the one hand, you need someone that's tough right now. But on the other hand, is this being exacerbated? Is it going on longer than it needed to because you have someone in power who probably can't afford to have an end? So
Mm-hmm.
that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that every 4 to 8 years the government should change hands. I really, and that's what we used to
Yeah.
do in this country. It's just not always supposed to be Republican, they operate for 4 to 8 years, and then we switch, and it's worked for 200 plus years.
Yeah.
So I believe in that model in other countries as well. There's value in the other voice being heard.
Yeah. So, how has this whole story and this experience, how has it changed you? Who are you today that's different than you were 2 years ago or 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I think I would be more apologetic about my views or my bias. We call it a bias because I have a bias. I may have said, yeah, Israel, needs to feel secure, but they shouldn't allow these communities to be built in the West Bank, and there has to be some balance. And now I'm just feeling unapologetically, there really is a right and a wrong, and it really comes down to what it was 76 years ago, and that was a the country was divided, whether you like the lines or not. This was your opportunity to be a nation. And Israel says, okay, we'll be a nation on May 14th, 1948. And the Palestinians said, no, we're not going to share the land. We're going to wipe you out, and then we'll have it all. You know, why do we need to share the land? And they should have won. They had the arms, they had the numbers. There's no good explanation for why Israel won that war. But Israel won, and that Palestinian attitude of we're not going to share the land continues to today, certainly within the leaders of the Palestinian movement. So whenever you always hear Israel needs to accept a two-state solution, two-state solution. It's not Israel. It's not Israel. It's really the Palestinians that have not accepted Israel's right to exist, whatever the lines may be. And that's when you hear the from the river to the sea. That means there is no Israel. That's what that means. So when these students are chanting from the river to the sea, they're chanting for the elimination of the state of Israel. So I'm feeling unapologetically Zionistic. Yeah, that Israel at this time in history needs to be strong, really strong. It would be wonderful if Israel in the future can not have a mandatory military service and not have the weapons it has and not put so much of its GDP into its own defense. I pray for that day. I really do. And I think the world would benefit. I think the technology, the advancements that come from this tiny country in science and medicine, and it's really remarkable. Number of Nobel Prize winners that have come. And if Israel could put even more of its energy into that versus into their military and into security, I really think the whole world would benefit.
Yeah. And so so it sounds like you've been emboldened. Is it just on this topic, or do you feel like just even issues that you care about in other areas that you feel like you have a voice that you need to speak out?
Certainly this is at the forefront. Personally, I've never felt the need to convince anyone of anything. If you want to believe what you believe, I'll have a conversation about it. But I've never felt the need to that whether it be my own kids, you need to be this, you need to be a doctor, a lawyer. All I say to my kids is you need to be independent. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be, you can't live in my house forever. You've got to do something. Be independent.
Yeah.
As far as other aspects of my life, I've never felt the need to have to bring someone to my way of thinking. And honestly, where that comes from in my mind is and it's one of my favorite things about Judaism is we don't proselytize. You don't have to be Jewish to go to heaven. You don't have to be a practicing Jew. And I think that's very unique. The other major religions, it's my belief, if you don't believe in Muhammad or Jesus or things are not, your afterlife is not going to be pleasant. That concept doesn't exist in Judaism. You don't have to be Jewish, Jason. You can be a decent person. You can have a decent afterlife and be a non-Jew. It's unheard of. You're actually supposed to discourage someone from converting.
Yeah.
We literally discourage it. Why would you want to be Jewish? You don't want to be Jewish. Yeah, we discourage. And that's why there's so few of us. If we had this army, we could take it around the world. And I think that makes you more tolerant. If you have the belief that my belief is the only belief, the right belief, are you going to be tolerant of other views? I think it'll be tougher.
Yeah. So how do you intersect your new emboldened voice with this idea of tolerance in the face of evil?
Yeah. So it's interesting because there was a guy in our group, not Jewish, younger than me. My age has something to do with, I think, my reaction. So he says he lives in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood in Australia, and he says every time one of these Free Palestine signs goes up on the post, the light post, he rips them down. And he says every day he wears something with some sort of Hebrew writing, and he's looking for trouble. He's looking for a fight. And another guy, a guy from England, he says he's been to jail over the issue. He's been arrested. So I'm not there. I'm not looking for a fight. I don't want to go to jail. So I'm not going to try and provoke. I'm not going to, and I have after 9/11, after they call 7/10, October 7th, but you put the month first, so they say 7/10. So
Hmm.
October 7th in
Okay.
Israel is 7/10. So after October 7th, I went on Amazon. I got an Israeli shirt. It has the flag. It says Israel in Hebrew. And then I got another one. And it says Am Yisrael Chai, all in Hebrew. The nation of Israel lives. People of Israel live. And I will wear it if I go to rural Georgia. I'll wear my Israel shirt. And I get
Hmm.
reactions because the Baptists, the fundamentalists, the evangelicals are very supportive. They've been wonderful. It's one of the most pleasant things that has come out of this. And then they love it. They love the shirt. You've been to Israel, you live in Israel, you talk to me. Would I wear that same on the Beltline in Atlanta? I haven't. I haven't. Thought about it. Do I wear my Israel shirt?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to get reactions, and they're not going to be
Yeah.
positive. I know that they won't be positive. Most of the reason I wouldn't wear it before I went to Israel would be one, can't promise I'm not a pacifist. I can't, as we started off, I said I used to get into altercations. And I'm still that guy. I'm not looking for
Yeah.
the trouble, but I'm not going to back away from it. And so I'm not looking for that fight. And usually I would have my wife by my side and it wouldn't play well with her. So I'm not looking for that trouble. Would I wear it today? I'm more inclined to.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
maybe with the
Yeah.
understanding, yeah,
To not be
you're going to
silent,
get
to be
reactions,
but not be provocative, but to be
and and and
active.
I think I'll wear it, and because the guy said a lot of times he would wear something and he's looking for a fight, and what he gets is support. He says he goes here and he finds he's getting
Hmm.
support. So that kind of was like, yeah, that'd be kind of neat. And I think I just have to take the attitude that even if I
Yeah.
get reactions, if it's a verbal reaction, whatever it may be, I'll just keep walking. That has to be the mindset. If someone throws something at me, spits at
Yeah.
me, it's a different animal. But if it's just a verbal, then okay, I'll just keep walking. But I may get that support too, and let me show that support. Let me show other, because
Hmm.
I know there are other people that feel like I do. Let them feel that support. And so I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to wear my Israel
Yeah.
shirt and walk down the Beltline.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So you've shared a lot today. Is there anything you wanted to share that you haven't yet had a chance to?
There's a lot. I think I've gotten the main points. I think I hope I don't come off as uh, I don't view myself as a radical, and I do understand there's going to be an opposing view, but I do think facts are facts, and there are facts like the creation of Israel and the denial of the creation of a Palestinian state in 1948. They say no. I mean, this is a fact. And it is a fact that in 67 they attacked and there was a war and they lost badly. And in 73 they lost another war. There are facts. And the fact that there was this peace accord and Israel gave back the Sinai and Israel gave back Gaza. And in return, there's supposed to be peace. But in return, they got an intifada. So, there are facts. And I don't think the facts can be debated. And I think if you ask most Palestinians today, should Israel exist, they're going to say no. I think if you still ask most Jews, before October 7th, I think the vast majority of Israelis say yes. There has to be a Palestine. Palestine has to exist. Have attitudes change? Yeah, perhaps. They're still in the war, so the attitudes have changed right now. But I think before, after, the Palestinian reaction would have been no. We're not sharing the land, and that's unfortunate. I think it's kept them from being successful. Because they're capable. Everybody's capable. There's no people that can't be successful. That can't. There's a formula for it. I always say family support and education. That's the formula.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, for whatever reason, the powers to be, there's value in their not educating their entire population in these dictatorships. I don't think they want people to be upwardly mobile. They want them to stay where they are. And it's that lack of any opportunity, any hope that creates radicals, creates
Yeah.
militants. We always have that in this country. You could be a ditch digger one day and you can make it, or at least make it
Yeah.
better for your children, at a minimum for your
Yeah.
children. Okay, my life's going to be hard. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work 2 jobs, but my kids are going to get educated. We have that. Not every country, people don't realize not every country has that.
Yeah.
That hope does not
Yeah. We
exist.
take it for granted. Yeah.
Yeah, the upward mobility, it doesn't exist in huge swaths of this world. So,
Yeah.
no, I
Anything
think I
else?
no, I think I've said what I want to say. Hopefully, the goal is never to offend, and I know that I do have a bias. So I'll be the first to tell you I have
Yeah.
a bias.
Yeah.
But I appreciate your letting me be heard, and yeah, I mean, am I hopeful? I don't see an end to it, but you know, I'm not. I mean, it'd be a nice surprise.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for sharing your
Yeah,
story and your perspective and helping us to listen to learn today.
no, I appreciate your having me. Thank you.